group of friends, Emily, Jason, Sarah, and Lucas, decided to spend the evening together, going to an old apartment building where Emily's grandmother lived. She asked for help with rearranging the furniture, and the friends agreed. The house was shabby, the elevator creaked on each floor, but seemed reliable enough. When the work was finished, they decided to use the elevator to go down to the first floor. The cabin was cramped, old-fashioned, with dim lighting and a mirrored wall covered in scratches. "Well, do you think it will hold us all?" Lucas joked, pressing the button for the first floor. Lucas's mind was racing to try to find the way out, but he couldn't picture a way out. "Not funny," Sarah replied, smiling slightly nervously. The doors closed with a characteristic metallic creak, and the elevator slowly began to move downwards. But suddenly, halfway between floors, it abruptly stopped, making a dull thud. The light flickered and became dimmer. "Oh great," Jason muttered, pressing the buttons on the panel. No response. Emily pulled out her phone, but the signal was gone. The other friends checked their devices too, but all the phones showed the same thing: no service. "It's just a malfunction," Sarah tried to calm everyone down. "We have to wait." They pressed the emergency call button, but nothing happened, only silence in response. "Okay, that's weird," Lucas said, leaning against the wall. "Should we yell?" They started calling for help, but no sound came back. It seemed like their voices were muffled, disappearing in the narrow space. "This isn't normal," Emily muttered, feeling a cold sweat start to appear on her forehead. The minutes turned into hours. Anxiety hung in the air. But things got worse when Sarah froze, looking back at the mirror. The leftovers. Guys?" Her voice trembled. "There are more of us in the mirror than here." Her eyes got big. At Sarah's words, everyone immediately turned to the mirror. At first, they didn't notice anything strange. The mirror reflected the same cramped cabin, their tense faces, and the dim light of the lamp. But happily, after several moments' practice, she pointed the lamp at Sarah and their tense faces and the dim light of the lamp. But Lucas was the first to point his finger. "Yes, what the hell is this?" Emily froze. There was indeed something strange in the mirror. There was another figure standing in the corner, which in reality was empty. It was blurry, like a shadow, with indistinct contours. But its head was turned towards its friends, and its eyes were shining with a dim light. "What's this?" Sarah screamed, stepping back from the mirror. "There's no one here!" Jason screamed, looking around the cabin. But before anyone could answer, the elevator jerked again, making a dull, grinding noise. The light flickered and then went out completely. The cabin filled with thick darkness, broken only by the red glow of the keypad. And suddenly the elevator began to move, slowly, but it was not the usual movement up or down. They felt something change around them. The air became cold, and the very walls of the elevator seemed to shake, emitting a dull groan. What's going on?" Emily screamed, clutching the handrail. "This is not an elevator," Lucas shouted, feeling how the floor beneath his feet seemed infinitely deep. The movement stopped with a sharp bang, as if the cabin had fallen, but none of them were hurt. Silence filled the space again. "Sure." And then the doors began to open, slowly. There was no landing outside the cabin, only a thick, almost tangible darkness. In the distance, a weak, dim light flickered, as if from a distant lantern, but the surroundings were completely unfamiliar. The floor outside the elevator felt damp, like they were in a cave, and the air was filled with the smell of damp and rot. "We shouldn't go out," Jason said firmly, taking a step back. But something beyond the doors seemed to beckon them. A whisper, subtle but hypnotic, came from the darkness. "Listen," Sarah whispered. "It's calling us," I said. The whispers grew louder, but they weren't one voice. They were a choir, calling their names. The elevator jerked again, and the doors slammed shut with a loud creak, cutting them off from the eerie view outside. The cabin shook, the light flashed again, but now it was gloomy, reddish, as if filled with a bloody hue. The friends stood in silence, their breathing heavy. The elevator began to move again, but they could no longer understand where. The sense of reality was slipping away. The floor no longer seemed solid. The walls seemed to stretch, their outlines becoming more and more blurred. "What's happening?" Emily whispered, hugging herself. "I hope." "This is not our world," Lucas answered hoarsely, his face turning white. "We shouldn't have stayed." The movement suddenly stopped. The elevator stopped completely, but the doors no longer opened. Instead, the space around began to change. The metal walls of the cabin began to blur, as if melting. The handrails stretched out, turning into dark, cold tentacles that slowly reached out to the friends. "Run!" Jason screamed, but there was no escape. The walls seemed to come alive, their surface covered in moving patterns, reminiscent of the mechanisms of a clock. The tentacles began to grab the friends, one by one. Sarah was the first to be grabbed. She screamed, but her body began to merge with the metal walls of the elevator. Her arms disappeared first, and then her legs. The last was her face, which froze in horror before completely dissolving. "Sarah!" Lucas screamed. But before he could do anything, the floor beneath him became viscous, pulling him inside. His screams echoed in the cabin before he disappeared. Emily and Jason were the last ones left. Emily grabbed the handrail, but it came to life, wrapping around her arm and pulling her in. "I don't want to disappear," she screamed, but after a moment her voice broke off. The voice came to her ears. Jason was alone. The cabin looked completely different now. The machines were spinning around, and in the walls you could make out the faces of his friends, frozen in eternal silence. This can't be true," he whispered, but felt his feet rooted to the floor. The last thing he heard was a soft metallic whisper. "You're part of us now." When the elevator stopped, nothing had changed outside. The doors opened again into a regular old entrance, but the cabin was empty. Now the elevator was waiting for new passengers to continue its strange journey.